On September 8, 1560, the ancient manor of Canor Place, nestled in a quiet corner of Oxfordshire, plunged into an unusual, almost palpable silence. That day, the area around Abingdon was alive with the anticipation of the annual fair, and this event became the sole topic of discussion among servants and locals. Amy Robsart, wife of the most influential man in the English kingdom after the monarch, showed a strange, obsessive persistence in ensuring that absolutely every inhabitant of the house went to the festivities. She didn't just allow it, she literally ushered her household out the door, as if it was vitally important for her to be alone with the echoing corridors and her own thoughts. When the last carriages disappeared around the bend, and the sounds of laughter and horse whinnies dissolved into the autumn air, a profound silence reigned in Canor Place, a silence that, a few hours later, would be shattered by a terrible discovery. That same evening, the servants, returning from the fair in high spirits, would find the lady of the house lying at the foot of a short 8-step staircase. Her neck was broken, and her lifeless gaze was fixed on the ceiling, which could no longer provide answers to the questions that arose at that very moment. This moment became a point of no return not only for her husband, Robert Dudley, but also for the entire Tudor dynasty, forever changing the trajectory of English history and leaving behind one of the most terrifying mysteries of the 16th century. To understand why the demise of one woman caused tectonic shifts in European politics, one must go back 10 years, to an era when the fates of young people were decided not by feelings, but by land allotments and family alliances. In June 1550, 19-year-old Amy Robsart, heiress of a wealthy Norfolk landowner, married Robert Dudley. It was a marriage of convenience, typical for the time, but contemporaries noted in it a spark of genuine affection. Robert was not yet the brilliant Earl of Leicester, before whom the court would tremble. He was merely the talented son of an ambitious Duke of Northumberland. Their early family life unfolded against a backdrop of turbulent and dangerous events. The fall of Edward VI's dynasty, the bloody reign of Mary Tudor, and imprisonment in the Tower, where Robert narrowly avoided the fate of his father, who ended his journey on the scaffold. Amy remained a faithful companion during these dark years, supporting her husband when his family fell out of favor and their property was confiscated. However, the ascension of Elizabeth I to the throne in 1558 instantly turned their quiet family life into a political burden. Robert, appointed Royal Master of the Horse, became the young queen's shadow, her closest advisor and, as whispered in all corners of Whitehall Palace, the only man she truly loved. While Amy languished in the countryside, moving from one estate to another under the supervision of trusted individuals, her husband danced the volta with the monarch, received foreign embassies, and made plans in which his lawful wife simply had no place. The external conflict of this story unfolded before the eyes of all Europe, transforming a personal drama into an international crisis. England in the early 1560s was in an extremely vulnerable position. A young Protestant queen on the throne, no direct heir, and a constant threat from Catholic powers, Spain and France. The main issue of state importance was Elizabeth's marriage, and Robert Dudley's candidacy was the most desired by the Queen herself and the most hated by her advisors. The favorite's living and legitimate wife was the only formal obstacle preventing Dudley from officially taking his place beside the throne. Foreign ambassadors in their reports savored every detail of this triangle. Spanish ambassador Álvaro de la Cuadra wrote to his king Philip II, that Elizabeth and Dudley were literally inseparable, and that the entire court awaited Robert's imminent deliverance from the Norfolk heiress. Rumors that Amy was gravely ill and her days were numbered spread with astonishing speed and frightening accuracy. In September 1560, Cecil, the Queen's chief secretary and Dudley's main political opponent, in a confidential conversation with the ambassador, let slip a phrase that later proved fatal. He reported that Robert's wife would soon end her earthly journey, although she was in good health, apart from a sickness in her breast that the maids whispered about. When news of the incident at Canor Place reached London the day after Cecil uttered his prophecy, a political explosion was inevitable. Europe was convinced. The favorite had removed an obstacle in his path with the silent consent or even direct order of the Queen. The internal conflict, hidden behind political decorations, was even more agonizing and complex. By the autumn of 1560, Amy Robsart represented a tragic figure of a woman aware of her uselessness. She lived in a golden cage, surrounded by luxury, but deprived of her husband's presence, who had visited her only a few times in the past year. Her letters to him, full of concern for the household and financial matters, contrasted with the brilliant atmosphere of the court, where Robert spent thousands of pounds on gifts for the Queen. Amy's internal state in those days was described as deep melancholy. There is evidence that she suffered from an ailment that modern researchers identify as breast cancer. In the 16th century, this condition was described as corruption in the body, and it caused not only physical pain but also bone fragility. This detail is key to understanding what might have happened on that staircase. However, her decision to send all the servants to the fair appears to be a conscious act, either a desire to end her life voluntarily, unable to bear the humiliation and physical suffering any longer, or preparation for a secret meeting that turned into a disaster. On the other hand, Robert Dudley himself was in a state of constant tension between his ambitions and the remnants of loyalty to his wife. He perfectly understood that any incident with Amy at that moment would destroy his reputation. And yet, his craving for power demanded a radical solution to the problem. This internal struggle between the man and the politician in Dudley reached its climax precisely that week, when he was in Windsor Castle, away from his wife, but at the very center of the intrigues that foreshadowed her end. At the ideological and philosophical level, the tragedy of Amy Robsart became a clash of two worldviews: the old chivalric ideal of loyalty and the new cynical Machiavellianism that permeated European courts. At the center of this conflict was the question of the price of power and the permissibility of personal sacrifices for state interests. Could a queen, embodying law and divine order, build her happiness on the ashes of a ruined subject's life? The entire philosophical foundation of Elizabeth's reign was built on her image as the Virgin Queen, married to her state. Possible complicity in eliminating a rival cast a shadow on the very sacredness of the monarchy. The paradox was that the very event that should have opened Dudley's path to the crown made that path absolutely impossible. In the eyes of society and the church, a marriage concluded after such a suspicious incident would look not like a union of two loving hearts, but like a triumph of sin and cynicism. The philosophy of power of that time dictated strict rules. The monarch must be above suspicion, but reality demanded actions from Elizabeth and her entourage that were far beyond morality. The clash of personal right to happiness and duty to the nation became the invisible front on which the main battle for the future of England unfolded. The tragic end of Amy's life became a symbol of the end of the innocence of the Elizabethan era, showing that behind the glitter of gold and the sound of the lute lay cold calculation and a willingness to step over anyone who stood in the way of the great design. The transformation of the perception of this event occurred at the moment the official investigation began. Robert Dudley, upon learning of what had happened, acted with astonishing determination bordering on despair. He understood that an accusation of a crime meant the end of his career and possibly his life. He immediately demanded the most thorough and public investigation, insisting that the jury include people hostile to him so that no one could accuse him of bribery. This was a brilliant and risky political maneuver. The coroner and 15 jurors spent several weeks examining the circumstances at Canor Place. At first glance, the version of an accident seemed absurd. How could an adult woman break her neck, falling only 8 steps, and still maintain a neat hairstyle, as some witnesses claimed? However, the coroner's report, found in archives only in the 21st century, shed new light on what happened. It recorded 2 deep wounds on Amy's head and a fracture of the cervical vertebrae. Modern medicine confirms that with certain pathological processes associated with oncology, bones become so fragile that even a minor fall can lead to fatal neck injuries. This medical fact radically changes the perception of the situation, transforming deliberate elimination into a tragic coincidence of biological fragility and a misstep. But for Dudley's contemporaries, this did not matter. For them, the transformation from a favorite of fortune to suspect number 1 became a fait accompli that forever changed his relationship with the Queen. The culmination arrived in those days when Elizabeth had to make a final decision: to trust her heart or the voice of reason embodied by William Cecil. Pamphlets circulated throughout London and European capitals, referring to Dudley as nothing short of his wife's butcher. The atmosphere became incredibly tense when it was revealed that Cecil had pre-prepared documents prohibiting the Queen from marrying a man implicated in such a scandal. Scenes hidden from the eyes of historians unfolded in Elizabeth's private chambers at Windsor, but their result became evident to the whole world. She publicly distanced herself from Robert, though behind closed doors, she continued to shower him with favors. The moment of truth came when the jury's verdict, accidental death, was officially announced. Despite the acquittal, the social and political stigma remained. Elizabeth realized that marriage to Dudley would lead to civil war or foreign invasion under the pretext of defending morality. At this critical moment, she chose the crown, finally embracing the role of a solitary monarch. Robert Dudley remained her eternal companion, but forever lost hope of becoming king consort. The tragedy of Amy Robsart became the very obstacle that proved greater than royal will and stronger than human passion, cementing England's image as an independent state led by an unmarried queen. The resonance of this event is felt through centuries, offering us lessons that remain eerily relevant. The story of Amy Robsart is a vivid demonstration of how information campaigns and black PR can destroy a political figure even before all facts are gathered. In the 16th century, rumors spread slower, but their destructive power was no less than that of modern media storms. The case at Canor Place teaches us that in high politics, truth is often secondary to perception. Even if Dudley was absolutely innocent and Amy was a victim of an accident caused by illness, political reality was constructed from suspicions and fears. This reminds us of the fragility of human reputation and how easily a personal tragedy can be instrumentalized to achieve global goals. Moreover, this story raises the eternal question of a leader's moral responsibility. Is Elizabeth responsible for creating a situation in which the life of her favorite's wife became an obstacle to state welfare? In the modern world, where the boundaries between private life and public duty continue to blur, a 400-year-old drama serves as a reminder that behind every great political decision stand living people with their pains, fears, and hopes, often sacrificed on the altar of history. To summarize this intricate narrative, we inevitably return to that very staircase at Canor Place. The image of a woman standing at the top of 8 steps in an empty house, when all sounds of the outside world have ceased, remains the most powerful and mysterious element of this story. Was it the resolve of a person who decided to end her suffering and free her beloved in one fell swoop? Or was it the last breath of a person who became a pawn in the game of titans? We will never know exactly what flashed through her mind in those last seconds. However, the consequences of her passing echoed in every subsequent decade of Elizabeth I's reign. Amy Robsart's shadow was invisibly present at every refusal of the Queen to yet another foreign suitor. She stood behind Robert Dudley when he, years later, tried to find solace in other marriages, and she also became the guarantor that England remained under the rule of the Virgin Queen. The irony of history is that the quiet and inconspicuous Amy Robsart, through her fatal fall, did more to shape the image of the English monarchy than many statesmen of that time. This tragedy remains an eternal reminder that history is written not only in throne rooms and on battlefields, but also in the silence of deserted homes, where a random step can change the fate of an entire nation. The entire chain of events, which began on September 8, 1560, demonstrates a striking interconnection between private life and the state mechanism. A careful study of William Cecil's letters and reports from foreign ambassadors shows that the apparatus of power was prepared for any outcome except the one that actually occurred. The political elite expected a long and exhausting struggle for a divorce or the legitimization of the Queen's relationship with her favorite. But a sharp break of the cervical vertebrae in a rural estate nullified all strategies. This event became a kind of black swan of the Elizabethan era, an unpredictable moment that made impossible what seemed predetermined. Robert Dudley, a man of incredible energy and ambition, carried this invisible burden until his dying day in 1588. Despite all the titles, orders, and lands bestowed upon him by the Queen, he remained in the popular memory as that very man from Canor Place. Studying this case from the perspective of forensic knowledge of that time and comparing it with modern data allows us to see a living tragedy behind the dry lines of reports. In the 16th century, people did not have the tools to understand how internal processes in the body could affect bone strength. For them, a fall that ended so tragically on level ground was either an act of God or the work of human hands. Today, we can assume with a high degree of probability that Amy Robsart was a hostage to her physical condition. And yet, the mystery remains. Why on that particular day? Why exactly then, when Cecil predicted her demise? This synchronicity of events continues to fuel conspiracy theories in which the Queen's principal secretary appears not merely as an observer, but as a skilled director who eliminated Amy through Dudley or his enemies, to permanently close the question of a marriage he considered disastrous for the country. If we look at this story through the prism of literature and art, we see how Amy's image transformed from a real woman into a romantic symbol. Walter Scott, in his novel Kenilworth, created a version of events that took root in the mass consciousness for centuries, adding drama and villainy that may not have been present in reality. But even without literary embellishments, The true story of Amy Robsart strikes with its internal dynamics. It is a story of how silence can be louder than a scream, and absence more significant than presence. She was absent from court. She did not participate in intrigues, but it was her absence from the fair on that ill-fated day that created a vacuum instantly filled with suspicions that changed the world. Each new generation of historians finds fragments of information in the archives that force us to reevaluate what happened. Letters found in private collections, bills for medicines, servants' records. All this comes together in a mosaic where there are no unambiguous colors. We see before us not just a detective story, but a grand canvas of human passions and political expediency. In this canvas, the threads of Elizabeth's, Robert's, and Amy's fates are so tightly intertwined that an attempt to pull one inevitably leads to the tearing of the entire fabric of the narrative. This unity and inseparability of events make the tragedy at Cumnor Place a perfect example of how small causes lead to great consequences. Examining Robert Dudley's psychological portrait in later years, we notice a strange pattern. He became one of the most ardent defenders of the Protestant faith and an active supporter of military aid to fellow believers on the continent. Perhaps this hyperactivity in public service was a form of atonement, or an attempt to finally silence the whispers behind his back. He built magnificent castles, arranged unprecedented festivities for the Queen, but in his personal life, there was always an element of unspokenness. His second secret marriage years later provoked Elizabeth's fury, comparable in intensity to the storm that erupted after the events of 1560. This suggests that the wound inflicted at Cumnor Place never fully healed, continuing to bleed at the very core of his relationship with the monarch. Thus, the story of Amy Robsart is not just an episode from the life of the Tudors. It is a fundamental paradox of power. It is a story of how the pursuit of absolute security and complete control over a situation leads to a result diametrically opposed to what is desired. William Cecil, seeking to save the Queen from a risky marriage, may indeed have had a hand in spreading rumors, but he could not foresee the price England's reputation would pay for it. And at the same time, it was this price that became the foundation for the Golden Age, where the Queen was unique and unrivaled, sharing power with no one but her people. Concluding our immersion in this era, we once again see the torch-lit halls of Whitehall, hear the rustle of brocade and the quiet whispers behind heavy tapestries. In these whispers, the name of a woman who never sought the crown, but whose fate became an integral part of it, can still be heard. Amy Robsart remained in history as a reminder that behind every great achievement lies a shadow, and the brighter the light, the longer that shadow. Her life, ending at the bottom of a staircase in quiet Oxfordshire, became the very stone thrown into the water, the ripples from which continue to spread across the surface of history into the 21st century, forcing us to peer into the darkness of the past again and again, in search of answers that, perhaps, are better left undiscovered. The entire architecture of Elizabethan rule, with its complex system of checks and balances, its cult of purity and public service, would have been impossible without the crisis of trust that occurred after Amy's death. This event taught Elizabeth the most important quality of a ruler: patience, and the ability to use her own weaknesses as a tool of influence. She understood that the uncertainty of her marital status was a powerful diplomatic weapon that could be used for decades, keeping all the monarchs of Europe in suspense. And the starting point for this realization was precisely that tragic end at Cumnor Place, which deprived her of the possibility of marrying for love, but gave her the opportunity to rule as a true autocrat. The events of 1560 also highlighted a deep disconnect between the official version of events and what people were willing to accept as truth. In this sense, the tragedy of Amy Robsart became a precursor to modern crises of trust in authority. When state institutions, in this case the coroner's court and the Privy Council, declare one version, and all circumstantial evidence points to another, a zone of turbulence arises in which legends are born. These legends live longer than facts because they appeal to our sense of justice and understanding of human nature. We want to believe in a conspiracy because it makes history logical, and we are afraid to believe in chance because it makes our lives too vulnerable. Amy's story is also a tale of a woman's fate in an era when a woman was merely an accessory to her husband's or father's status. Her loneliness in Cumnor Place, her attempts to manage the household in her husband's absence, her physical pain, and the psychological pressure from society, all this creates an image that evokes deep sympathy. She was not a player in this game, she was the space upon which the game was played. And her only independent act, the persistent demand for the servants to leave the house, remains the final chord of her life, which we can interpret as we wish, but which will forever remain her secret. Ultimately, the resonance of this story lies in its lack of a definitive ending. Each new examination, each discovered document, only adds depth to this mystery. We continue to discuss Amy Robsart not because we want to solve a 400-year-old crime, but because this story focuses all the main contradictions of human existence: love and power, duty and betrayal, chance and destiny. And as long as these questions trouble humanity, Amy's shadow will continue its journey along the steps of history, reminding us how fragile the line is between greatness and oblivion, between triumph and tragedy. Concluding this narrative, we leave Cumnor Place in the evening twilight of September 8th, 1560. The servants are already returning, their voices audible from afar. They do not yet know that their lives, like the life of the entire country, have been divided into before and after. In this moment of frozen time lies the entire essence of the historical process, an instant when the mundane meets eternity, and when one wrong step on the stairs turns into a legend that will stir minds half a millennium later. This silence of Cumnor Place is not emptiness, but a fullness of meanings that we continue to decipher, returning again and again to the beginning, to try to understand what cannot be fully understood. The entire journey from a modest heiress to a woman whose name became synonymous with political scandal, Amy Robsart traversed with a dignity that we can only infer from indirect evidence. Her loyalty to her husband during his downfall and her humility during his rise paint a portrait of a personality of exceptional strength. And perhaps it was this strength that proved fatal for her. In a world ruled by intrigues and ambitions, sincerity and simplicity often turned out to be the most dangerous qualities. Her departure from life, whatever it may have been, became the final contribution to the success of the man she loved and the queen she served, even if that success was built upon her own demise. Thus, the circle closes, which began with fairground merriment and ended with centuries of silence. English history took its course. Elizabeth I became the greatest monarch in history, Robert Dudley her most loyal ally, and Amy Robsart the eternal mystery at the foot of the stairs. But in this silence and in this mystery lies the true power of history, which does not allow us to forget that behind every political myth lies a real human life, full of pain, hope, and quiet, unseen valor. And it is this that makes the tragedy at Cumnor Place eternal, forcing us to peer again and again into the shadows of the past in search of a reflection of our own humanity.